everyone. Thanks for joining me on The People's Space, a podcast specifically designed to give you exciting and enriching conversations with regards to Zambia's socio-economic development. The name is Winston Mavor, and of course, I always get privileged to speak to interesting guests who are not only intelligent and playing crucial and key roles when it comes to Zambia's socio-economic governance. And of course, one of them with me today is Mr. Ibrahim Kamara. He is coming from the Center for Trade Policy and Development. Mr. Kamara, it's a great pleasure to have you join me today.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Good morning.
Yeah. So, one of the things that I want us to start with, or it's actually a tradition that we have on this particular platform, before we get into the meat of our conversation, we want our viewers, our listeners, and everybody that interacts with us on this particular exciting and interesting podcast to get to know who the guest is. So, personally, I know you, apart from the many times that we've worked together and continue working together, and so many times I bother you when I need answers to certain things. Who is Ibrahim Kamara?
Well, I think I have very little to say about that, but Ibrahim Kamara is a Zambian citizen born to Malian parents. I grew up in a very small family.
I was actually about to ask, are you Zambian? But
no, I'm definitely Zambian. I grew up in a small family, and of course with Islamic values. And besides that, I think away from work, away from economics, I have an interest in history and astronomy. Just reading, of course, not that those are my specialities. I find history, astronomy, as well as philosophy exciting. And when I look at that, I think it really calls for a reflection, personally, around what our role is here, and just to reflect more deeper with regards to our stance around moral issues, the values that we instill upon society and all. Yeah, I think basically that's me. Nothing complicated.
Okay, interesting. So, have you ever taken an interest, for example, being born from Malian parents and being a Zambian, growing up in Zambia? Have you taken an interest to, say, visit Mali, get to see your other family over there?
Yeah. Okay. I have.
That's wonderful. Okay. Can you speak their language?
I can speak their...
What language do they speak over there?
Well, I'm sure they have a lot of tribes, but my tribe is Soninke, and that's a language I grew up speaking with my parents. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. We know there's quite a lot happening in Mali over there, which obviously we'll talk in a different episode altogether. But there are people who may be interested. Yeah. Who is this Ibrahim Kamara? Is he married? Is he dating somebody? I mean, what's up? Ladies want to know that,
Like I said, no, Ibrahim is what I define.
Okay, anyway, we'll get back to that question later on, but... For those of you that are watching, there's still hope, There's still hope. So, apart from, I mean, for those that may not know, we were together in the Bloomberg, economics class, and you were the top student in that class, for those that do not know. So if they think Ibrahim is just the guy who loves philosophy and everything, he's quite a brainy character, Yeah, so a lot of people used to copy from him except me, But apart from, what you've just told us, what are your hobbies? What do you like,
I love reading. And partly where my interest comes from is the books I read. Yeah, so besides reading, I also love to write a lot. And in terms of sports, I think my hobbies have transitioned over time. At some point, I used to love chess. I think I was a good player.
Typical of intelligent people.
No, not exactly. But besides that, I've also grown to love the sports of fighting, which is boxing. don't worry, I can't throw a punch.
I know. I was actually trying to measure the distance. But,
yeah.
Okay. So when we talk about the issue of boxing, who is your all-time greatest boxer?
I have two, but of course there is Mike Tyson. He's not the top. I just love the way he was. He used to knock out people. Yeah. And besides him, I think the other one would be Ali.
Okay, so I think we're going to have a good conversation because on this one we agree.
Yeah.
On this one, we agree. Yeah. I also take Muhammad Ali and Mike Tyson any day, anytime. Great. But when we talk about the much anticipated celebrity fight, before we get into our thing, Jake Paul, Mike Tyson, first and foremost, do you think it's a fight that should even happen, looking at Tyson's age?
Well, I mean, Tyson is quite old now, but Jake Paul also isn't that, natural boxer. It's
YouTube fighter.
They call him a YouTube fighter. Yeah, I've seen a few of his fights. He's been able to knock out people, so I think he does have the power in his right hand. Mike Tyson, quite old, but he was a professional boxer. I think if they went 5 rounds or more, maybe Tyson could drop him. I don't know. I could be biased because he was one of my favorite. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting there. So now let's just get into our conversation. Recently, Minister of Finance and National Planning, Dr. Stompeko Msokotwane, announced to the nation the 2025 national budget, and we've been building conversations around the budget because it's an important document all in all. If we talk about anything that we hope to see achieved in any given fiscal year, obviously the budget plays a crucial role. And you coming from civil society organizations, one of the things that I wanted to find out is, first and foremost, when you look at where we are, social protection plays a very key in terms of providing that safety net for a lot of economic shocks that we may be going through as a country, looking at where we are. So looking at the allocation to social protection, the increase that we've seen, in your view, what is your take? Is it sufficient to be able to cushion where we are, the shocks that the Zambians are dealing with on the ground?
Yeah. Well, I think when we look at what has been happening to social protection allocation over the years, you will notice that there has been a significant increase throughout. Not long ago, I think we were barely at 4 billion. And as we are talking about 2025, it would also be good to reflect on how much has been allocated towards social protection. So we have about 16 billion, which has been allocated towards social protection. And I think this is coming from the understanding that things have not been quite, easy on the ordinary people, especially in the rural areas where the poverty levels are extremely high, and the cost of living has also been skyrocketing. Inflation is also high, and social protection comes in as a cushion measure, significantly aiding those who are unable to attain a decent livelihood. It has a number of programs. We have the social cash transfer. We also do have the provincial welfare assistance scheme. So these are programs that aim at providing some monetary financing for the most vulnerable in society. Of course, in terms of allocation and adequacy, as we talk about our current state here, it's also just good to know that there would it would not be easy to have an adequate amount because we have a lot of people who are vulnerable, and there's only so much we can do as a country before we begin to overrun our budgets. But I think it's good that over the years, government expenditure towards social protection measures has been increasing. Of course, would want to see more, especially for programs such as the social cash transfer, where if you go into the rural areas and see who the beneficiaries are, you'd also, you'd believe that it's justified to give such monetary expenditures. Of course, the amount itself is not very, it's not too much. I mean, it's I think it's about 400, which is given every after 2 months, if I'm correct. And you know what our cost of living is. I mean, we are talking about something around 9,000, depending on which measure you are using. There's a prominent government one, and there's also the other one from the CSO side, which we normally quote. But if you look at that, I think you understand that social protection measures would need to keep evolving for them to be able to adjust and adapt to, cushioning the lives of people amidst, certain economic and social hardships.
I love the fact that you've acknowledged and mentioned, because a lot of debate is always on, 400 kwacha is too little. If you look at the price of milli meal itself, you buy one bag of milli meal in 400, you are remaining with change that can't even buy you a kilogram of meat to be able to eat with that same milli meal. And, that has been debate. But besides social cash transfer, especially for people in rural areas, are there other interventions that, say, could be considered to be able to supplement the social cash transfer at its current rate, even as we look and hope for it to increase?
Yeah. So initially, one of the objectives of the social cash transfer itself was to give people some monetary, sort of compensation and expect them to graduate over a period of time for them to find their footing and, start doing something out of their lives. But we have come to understand that that is an objective far-fetched. If you look at how much money is given, it's like hand to mouth. Okay, so maybe one of the things that could, and I know there are already existing programs. The World Bank has had the GEO program, which was also sort of giving, it had different components. So it was also supporting women, it was supporting school girls going to, school girl, the children who are going to school, the girl child. Yeah. And also, I think it was also looking at the ordinary, the elderly people. I think those were the components of the GEO program, which was financed by the World Bank, and we carried out a study somewhere in 2019, and one of the things that we found was that for the programs such as the GEO program, those were, they were good. In terms of ensuring that the girl child can go to school, but there was need for more training and sort of like dealing with the structural issues. And this is where I want to also reflect on the social cash transfer. I think there are also issues around the delayed payments. So sometimes it's and I know this usually happened a lot in the past. I want to believe that nowadays the situation is different and people get their resources somewhat timely. But that was also affecting, because if you are hungry and you are not given that money, it doesn't matter whether you are going to be given a full amount after 6 months, but what happens for those periods when you do not have those resources? So I think it is important that we look at these programs also in terms of implementation, because it's one thing to have a program, it's another to implement it well. Besides the social cash transfer, I think the other important thing that government can do is, just stimulate the business environment. For instance, we talk about entrepreneurship, but it's not very easy because, if you do not have the resources, if you do not have the finances, how do you start a business? And now we know that youth unemployment is quite high, somewhere around 19%, and overall population standing at 12%. That tells you a lot about the current challenges that we are facing as a country. So there's need to have an integrated approach where we are looking at the vulnerable in society, but also ensuring that we do not have more vulnerable or more people moving into the vulnerable brackets. And so I think that would be very important. And my recommendation, of course, would be for government to also come up with a number of programs. I know we have empowerment programs already, and there's a lot we can talk about that, their failures, and how is it that they have not been able to, come up with the actual empowerment. These are structural issues around the very programs which we can always talk about. Yeah.
All right. I love the fact that, you've mentioned the issue of the cost of living, something that, irrespective of one's social, political, or economic affiliation or status, we are all experiencing and are feeling the pinch of it. What, in your opinion, do you think can be done to navigate the challenge of the cost of living? Every time you open the radio, you see people debating. It's always milli-mil that, milli-mil this. So in your opinion, what do you think could be done to address this issue?
Yeah, it's interesting how we always associate the cost of living to milli-mil. We normally just reduce it down to that, and you would understand, milli-mil plays a significant role in our culture here. We also need to understand perhaps how we got to this situation. We have a number of players in the agricultural sector. You have the Ministry of Agriculture, you have the Food Reserve Agency, you have the farmers, both the commercial and smallholder farmers, and you have their methods of, agriculture, be it irrigation or those who are dependent on rain-fed agriculture. And for milli-mil specifically, I would draw your attention to the smallholder farmers who have largely produced and sustained the national food security, because they are the ones that produce a lot of milli-mil, which is sold to the Food Reserve Agency. But their agriculture depends on rainfall, and we understand that we are coming from a drought. We are still in a drought, and hopefully this time around we'll have sufficient rains, which will assist in revamping the agricultural sector. So when we have a drought and there is no other, there is no other ways in which agriculture can be conducted besides depending on rain, then what you're going to have is a disaster. And this is where we are as a country. A lot of crops were damaged, maize, and because the supply had reduced and the demand had kept increasing. So this is why we are seeing that the cost of milli-mil has gone high. And the Food Reserve Agency, of course, with its role to procure from the smallholder farmers and anybody else that sells to them, they were unable to meet certain targets because of that drought. Potential explorations for sorting out this issue, of course, to start with, is we need to move away from depending on rain. I know it takes a lot because agriculture, in terms of irrigation, is quite expensive, and you would need to invest in irrigation systems and all that over a period of time. So I don't expect that this is something that is going to be immediately addressed, but we can begin to make steps towards that. I think the other thing is, of course, we always talk about as well the rigidity in the maize subsector, and why other players have not normally come to the party to grow. For instance, the commercial farmers who have found it unattractive to grow maize, because you do not know who you are going to sell or when you are going to sell. If at all you are going to sell, because we've had those issues, you remember, and in periods where the demand has been increasing and there's been a trigger on the quantities, you find that government in the past has put a ban to export. While that is something that would address the outflow of maize, it's something also which is affecting those who would want to grow more maize, because you are uncertain, and we know that the cost, or the prices of maize are quite low in Zambia compared to the region, and farmers would opt always to sell to foreigners. The DRC Congo, we have known that they have offered exorbitant prices compared to how much milli-mil would fetch for in the domestic economy. But also further, I think there's a role that government can play, and this is something that they have already started. I know through the correctional, the correctional facilities. I know that there's agriculture which is taking place there. ZNS as well, I think, could play a more significant role, as they have already done. And the millers on the other end, I think there's also something that can be said about how their pricing goes. In the past, they have received some subsidies in order to ensure that they keep the price of milling meal low. But also now there are questions around whether that is cascading and ensuring that the price is actually kept low. And in this time around.
But would you blame them though when you look at the rate at which things are increasing in our economy? Look at electricity tariffs, look at all these things, they all have a ripple effect. So would you really blame them?
Well, I think my recommendation is for us to just really grow a lot. Prices have a tendency to go down when there is a lot of supply. Let's just produce a lot of maize. If we're going to stick to maize as a staple crop, as a staple food, we need to produce more, and we need to ensure that we do that quickly.
Okay, so you talked about drought earlier on, something that we are all again feeling and experiencing in the country. And, just to talk about drought, Ibrahim, the funny thing is that each of us is experiencing drought in a different way. I was talking to somebody who was telling me, for the farmers, obviously, it's the issue of production. For the singles, obviously, it's the lack of partners. It's also a drought in a way. So I was just, I was like, okay, so we're experiencing drought. For those that don't have money, it's also a drought in their pockets. I was just like, okay, drought is everywhere, literally. But we've heard, pronouncements from the budgets. And I'm using the word budgets because we've seen these since the UPND assumed office. The construction of dams, the water harvest that the president confidently speaks about. And, droughts, the funny thing about technology is that droughts are not a mystery. They're not a secret. Nowadays we live in a world where we have the technology to be able to predict that you are going to have a drought. You're going to have below normal rainfall. All these things. But we don't get to see corresponding action in terms of urgency from the authorities to be able to say, begin these water harvesting projects, start construction of these dams. Instead of them coming repeatedly in budgets, why not show us one dam and say, oh, we've done one in Kafue, here's a dam. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I've seen a few allocations, and I think even in the 2025 national budget, we have seen an allocation which is talking about the construction of, not actually an allocation, but there was a mention of government plans to build more dams. But when you go to the Yellow Book, what you actually see is that a lot of resources have been committed towards the Food Reserve Agency and the Farmer Input Support Program. So I think that's maybe that's where we get it wrong. We acknowledge what we need to do, and we still do not do it. Even just in the case of a drought, for how long? And as you rightly put it, we know now that there is climate change, and you cannot predict whether you are going to have rainfall or you are not going to have adequate rainfall. What have we done? For instance, we were supposed to, support with irrigation, and perhaps, guidance could have been given to move away from, crops that depend a lot on water and maybe go towards drought-resistant crops, at least for the time when we are going to have a drought. So I think there's a lot that we can talk about when it comes to agriculture. But my only hope is that this time around, as there has been a commitment and a discussion around the provision and the building of dams, I think that's something that government needs to work around. And speaking of the dams, I think an interesting area where these dams are also supposed to be constructed is within the farm block areas. Most of these farm block areas were designated way back, and the rain pattern has since changed, and we know that rain has moved away from certain parts of the country to other areas of the country. But one of the challenges that you find when you go to the farm block areas is that they do not have water. They do not have adequate infrastructure, for instance, the roads. The other thing that they are, struggling with is communication and, I think, communication and electricity. So as we are talking about improving the agricultural sector, and as we already have programs such as the Farm Block program, which I believe is a good program, but it just hasn't been stimulated enough, I think. We have now almost 10 dotted across the country, and these are based on provincial areas. I think what would be important for us as a country is to actualize at least one. I know there are two which are normally cited. There's the Nansanga Farm Block, and there's one in Kawambwa. But when you actually visit these sites, there's a lot that can be, there's a lot that is left to be desired. The infrastructure is very poor there. You talk to commercial farmers, they'll tell you their concerns, and electricity, water as well is an issue. If government is seeing these as industrial parks for agriculture, I think government needs to have an active role and ensure that at least we begin to implement them properly. These are intended to attract investment in the agricultural sector, and for farmers to go there, be it large or small scale farmers, I think they'll need to find the infrastructure which is already there to sustain their operations. And I think that's a role that the government should critically play for these farm block areas to operate to what we expect them to do and contribute towards our agricultural sector.
I always believe that to be able to have true economic power, one must be able to own the factors of production. I mean, you're an economist, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And when we talk about the farm blocks, what I always ask is, there's nothing wrong with investment, and I'm not against it. I support it entirely. But why don't we also deliberately start thinking of mechanisms of how we could encourage our own people to be able to take up, space in those parks that you mentioned earlier on, the farm blocks and all this. It's like, if you say 100 hectares, you are obviously expecting a Chinese or a white person to come and set up shop. Not that there's anything wrong with that. If they're willing to come, the terms are good. We want them to come and partner with our local people. But don't you think there also has to be a deliberate push to be able to come up with schemes and measures of saying, okay, as government policy, here's what we'll do to also give a chance to our people to manage to take up investments in these regions? Okay,
so within the farm blocks, there are two types of farmers. So we already have the commercial farmers, and I understand that at least from the few that we visited, the large-scale farmers are foreign owned. So this is where the majority of them, you have investors who are coming from South Africa, for instance, to come and invest in the agriculture. And then we also have the smallholder farmers. These were initially settlers who lived around that area before it was designated to become a farm block. So they held various pieces of land sizes. And when that was formalized to become a farm block area, they were requested to apply and wait for the allocation of that land. I know that these smallholder farmers were given, or at least were shown, that this is where your land is going to be, because one of the concerns that we found when we were interviewing the smallholder farmers is land security. They still do not feel that that is not their land because they do not have formal documentation to tell them that this is your land. And so there is a sense of insecurity. And so developing land then becomes problematic and challenging because you do not know whether government or anybody else is going to come and take away that land. So I think to start with, addressing the issue around smallholder farmers, as a country, and government, of course, needs to ensure that it formalizes the processes of land allocation for these smallholder farmers. Most of them, we found that they initially grew maize over large pieces of land, but because when the allocations were made, land was contracted, and so you find that before they would have higher yields, but then after their transition into the farm block, they begin to produce lesser. So you see where the problem is, because you would be expecting that within the farm block there is a lot of productivity, and so I think it's an issue of commitment to land that is supposed to be sorted. With regards to commercial farming and the investment from the local people, I think it's partly also an issue of culture. we don't see a lot of people wanting to carry out investment in the agricultural sector, and of course, because agriculture itself is one that is that requires a lot of skills. You require patience, and most of all, it's risky. And for us, Zambians, I think normally we want fast money.
Fast
if I could put it that way, and it also requires nurturing, and so I think for people in Zambia, I think maybe these are some of the issues. I suspect this could be some of the issues, of course, and of course the other thing is money. You need the money to invest in any other sector, be it agriculture or mining. But it is concerning. I do agree with you that we do not have many people participating within the farm block areas, at least. But again, like I said, for people to go into those farm block areas, you need to have the money, but you also need to have the supporting infrastructure. Otherwise, there will be no difference between me conducting agriculture anywhere else and me going into the farm block. If I'll still not find roads, if I'll still find challenges with communication, if I'll still find challenges with electricity. So the first thing that needs to happen for investment to be attracted within the farm block area is for government to attract the investors by providing the necessary and adequate infrastructure within those farm block areas. Yep.
All right, so we will take a short break and we'll be back. My guest is Ibrahim Kamara, all the way from the Center for Trade Policy and Development. And of course, we are still looking at the 2025 national budget from a social sector perspective. We'll be back shortly. All right, welcome back to the People's Space. My name is Wenson Mavor, and of course, we are talking about the 2025 national budget and looking at its impact on social protection. What are some of the positives that are enshrined in the budget? And of course, to give us that perspective is Mr. Ibrahim Kamara, all the way from the Center for Trade Policy and Development. Now, before we came on, I was trying to still find out off camera if at all this gentleman is still on the market or not, but it seems that answer will require some serious persuasion to be able to get it, but we will still keep asking anyway. Mr. Kamara, obviously, and I just wanted to put it out there to the people so that I'm not blamed for not asking, But anyway, when you look at the 2025 national budget, the public service function commands a significant share, to which a large portion goes to debt servicing. What impact does this have on critical sectors that are supposed to provide the relief you talked about earlier on from the economic shocks that the country is going through?
Yeah, debt still remains a serious problem, or at least now maybe a slightly serious problem, because we've had the processes which have been going on towards restructuring, and we understand that at least over 80% of it has been restructured, and so we have it broken down. Of course, if you look at the public sector budget, you still find that debt service payments account for, I think, over 80% of that specific budget. So it tells you that we still have a lot of commitments towards debt service payments. What that does is, in simpler terms, of course, if you are not paying back your debtors, then your creditors, you have that money to spend, or even at household level. If you've got Nkongole, which you are not paying, it means you've got enough resources to spend towards any other thing that you have. And so what this does to the budget is that for those resources which could have gone towards the sectors that we have been discussing, maybe more investment into agriculture, maybe more allocation towards the social sectors, what you find is that money has to go towards debt service payments. It has to happen because we do owe people money, and at least we are talking about an amount which could have been much higher if we did not have restructuring processes which did take place. Maybe what we need to reflect upon are the lessons that we can draw from the struggles that Zambia has had when it comes to debt and debt service payments. I think ultimately the burden of paying back debt still lies with the ordinary people. If it's external debt, of course, you have to, you pay in dollars, and that is money that still has to be paid from taxpayers' money. If you're talking about increasing, debt levels in the domestic, or the government borrowing from the domestic economy, you are going to be looking at things like, rising interest rates, and all these are the side effects that we can look at when it comes to debt. I think another important thing, of course, is how you use that debt money which you have borrowed. The last report from I think it was called the Special Report on Debt by the Auditor General. It brought out a number of issues, and what we know is that over a period of 10 years, when Zambia was contracting that debt from the domestic and the foreign market, most of that money, maybe not most, but a part of that money was not really used prudently, and we saw money committed towards infrastructure, the roads which were never finished, a university which was never delivered, but the money was still paid, and contractors still benefited from that money. So I think ultimately the burden of paying back debt still lies with the ordinary people. If it's external debt, of course, you have to, you pay in dollars, and that is money that still has to be paid from taxpayers' money. If you're talking about increasing that money from debt where it was supposed to go, for instance, like to projects which I've said, infrastructure, which were never completed, which were never delivered, others were actually cancelled, and that is still money we are still paying for. So I think we could look at debt in different dynamics, and where we are currently, I think it's a bit more certain because of course the debt payment for some bonds has been spread for a long period of time. We'll still need to be paying that money, of course, but at least it provides us a grace period for us to commit resources towards other sectors.
So for more on debt, watch out for an episode where I'll be talking to Peter Mumba, and of course we'll be discussing in depth when it comes to the issue of debt, where we are as a country, and what it is that we can do to be able to mitigate the impact. But moving on, Ibrahim, let me turn your attention to the much talked about Constituency Development Fund, often referred to as the game changer. We've heard a lot of bragging here and there. When CDF came, even companies that were almost dying, that were into, supply of services and goods and whatever, people went to look for their files again and say, CDF is coming. We are going to benefit. Let me first of all hear your take on the increased allocation. There have been concerns, of operational and structural challenges surrounding the CDF. Yet we see government keeping on to increase this particular amenity. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, CDF has been around for so many years.
True.
If it becomes a game changer now, it's because we are looking at it in terms of the increasing amounts, and maybe not so much on how it has been implemented over the years. It still faces challenges. I know per constituency then was receiving around 4 million, and now we are talking about over 30. I think it's now 36 for the 2025 national budget. The principle behind the Constituency Development Fund is decentralization. We want to devolve functions. We want to ensure that the communities are able to provide for themselves a future which they have designed and understand for themselves. And so this is where you have the different components of CDF. You have the community projects and all those other components of CDF. To call it a game changer, of course, CDF plays a significant role. Just like I have indicated, the resource commitment has been increasing, and this is something which has been concerning for those that have had a chance to look at how CDF money has been utilized. And you still face challenges, for instance, like we had challenges then of late disbursements, and because communities and constituencies, of course, are different in size and their needs, you find other constituencies were doing more and spending more of that money compared to others, which had a huge amount of money which they had never utilized. But beyond that, there are also implementation challenges. I hope now with the revised guidelines, this is something that is going to be handled well. But there were challenges with regards to accessing that money. For instance, a number of projects where communities, apply for projects, but still you do not understand the selection criteria or why your project has not been accepted. And there were a lot of projects which we found. For instance, when you interview the relevant authorities, you find that a huge amount of projects were submitted, but only a handful were selected for financing. Besides that, I think the loans and a grant scheme of the CDF is something which would need to be attended to. If we have amounts of money which we are allocating towards loans, let them be loans. If they are grants, let them be grants. But I think most of the resources which have been given as loans are resources which never came back. When you interview people on the ground, they actually feel like that is a reward for them. Because they are in those communities. And I understand the dynamics at community levels for those that are in the rural areas and the constituencies that are...
As we wrap up, you mentioned something very, very important. The issue of the money that people are receiving and the need for oversight. Yeah. Earlier, we had heard the Bankers Association of Zambia make an announcement that they will be able to collaborate with government to ensure disbursement. Don't you think we're working in reverse here, Good move, you've brought in the bankers to administer the money. Yeah. But there will be charges, there will be everything. It may likely increase the cost, Again, you are giving money to people that don't have, for lack of a better term, adequate financial literacy. Not that they are incapable of obtaining that, but they may not have it adequately to be able to handle those funds. So don't you think, first of all, we should have maybe rolled out initiatives that would build that capacity and then start giving them these loans, these grants, briefly?
Well, I think banks have always had a role to play because that money from the central bank and moving from the government central bank into the commercial banks where the councils would access that money. I think that's something that has always been there. I think what's coming out now is the issue of the commercial banks actively involved where that money could be withdrawn and maybe ensuring that there's timely disbursements of those resources. I don't know to the extent whether the commercial banks do have presence everywhere such that it becomes easy for those at the rural communities, constituencies to be able to access. I think there'll still be limitations with regards to that. What I would see as a good initiative, of course, and I think this is something that you briefly tackled, where we should have initiatives already pre-rolled before we can look at how this money is going to be moving. So I think we have a number of small, maybe even just giving room for small financing agencies to grow and maybe using platforms like Airtel Money, for instance, for things like the loans and everything else which is being dispersed. I think the whole idea is that we shouldn't really look at the system as a central system where we have big players like, commercial banks. I think there's also room for smaller businesses to benefit. And I think that's something that we should be trying so that we have the smallest players as well participating in the, if I could call it, the value chain of the Constituency Development Fund. And I think that is something that would be ideal for this country and also giving business to the local and smallholders.
I love that part, Ibrahim. Giving business to the local and small hoarders. But before my director kills me here, in 2 minutes, Ibrahim, in 2 minutes, you highlighted something very important, the different sizes of the local authorities that administer these funds. And among the prominent issues also has been the capacity to be able to handle those funds. Yeah. So you discover that in some of these local authorities, there is evidence of lack of capacity. And some of them, even when it comes to the issue of projects that speak to the needs of a community. The same WDCs?
Yeah.
Exactly. They don't have the capacity for project management, how to come up with the project, what to do. As a result, politicians just use them to rubber stamp what they want to do in their constituencies to be able to secure more votes or come back for the second term in office. How critical is this issue as we get to close?
Yeah, it's very hard to separate the CDF from politics. I think the leader of the CDF committees, you understand that it's the member of parliament and that is a politician. They are in charge of selecting which projects go through and what type of projects consequently are going to be approved. And I think what is critical when it comes to the CDF implementation is that we allow the communities themselves to decide which projects they want. The councils really only play a facilitating role because they are the ones that are in charge of dispersing the money once the projects have been approved. And of course, I know there are members of the council. I think it's the council secretary or anybody from the council which is part of the CDF committees which are approving projects. And one of the challenges that we also noted when we are conducting work around CDF is that CDF has actually just been used as a political tool. I'll not talk much about the politics of CDF and what the impacts have been. But I think you also saw that there are those projects which are directives. Okay, what is giving them their substance in terms of where they're coming from and why that money should be spent in that. Of course, they call them presidential. I think they call them presidential directives. Recently, we saw the building of certain structures which were directed, to be financed from the CDF. I think it is. I think what is important is that we just separate CDF from the politics, allow the people to decide what they want, and I think that is the best way that we could allow for community participation. If we are going to allow politicians direct which projects and how projects should be conducted, then the spirit behind the CDF and decentralization dies out. We might as well just allow the central government to continue to finance development in these rural areas. But it's critical that we allow the people themselves because they understand what their needs are. If they want to choose between a school and a hospital, it's up to them. If they want both, it's up to them. If they want a road, you cannot go and build a stadium where using money which the people do not feel like a stadium is relevant. For instance, that's just an example, by the way, in case there's somewhere where a stadium has been built. I'm not really citing that one. But I think basically that's it. Let's just allow the people to handle a CDF. If there's need for training, the councils maybe capacity building with regards to the challenges which they face in terms of handling resources. And we know councils have just really not been good when it comes to handling resources and also just implementing certain things. You could see the graders which were already there before the CDF. Most of them were dead. And now we have, constituencies which are allowed to buy graders, popularly known as earth-moving machines. We are yet to see how that is going to outplay, but I think we need the hand of the council to come in because these are things, of course, that we need servicing, for instance, and if we leave them like that, then we are really making a loss.
All right. Yeah. Indeed, Ibrahim, I agree with you that when we talk about decentralization, the issue of shared power and responsibility plays a key role. And I couldn't agree with you more when you talk about people playing a very central role when it comes to effective administration of the Constituency Development Fund. That is not only, spoken of in word in terms of its, magnificent results, but it actually delivering to the needs that various communities within the country and constituencies actually do have. My guest has been Ibrahim Kamara, all the way from the Center for Trade Policy and Development. And of course, we were discussing the 2025 national budget, looking at its impact on the social sectors, highlighting some positives, and of course, bringing out recommendations on how things can be made better. As always, is the motto for this particular podcast. We don't just discuss problems, we also offer solutions. See you next time, and thank you for watching.